Good day, everyone. I trust everyone is well and in good health. My name is Jason, and I'll be presenting my research on behalf of myself and Professor Fatima Abrams on the evaluation of the differences in perception towards stress and trauma intervention strategies in the South African Police Service. So the agenda will work like this. I'll start with the introduction and background, move on to the research purpose, the research design, research findings, and eventually the conclusion. So before moving on to the introduction and background, I'd just like to set the scene a little bit with a short clip.
Then I must point you with a finger here.
I think much is going to depend on our ability to promote the role of the helping professions, to convince police officials that their careers are not on the line if and when they admit to being traumatized or in need of help.
So we are all aware of the crime rate in our country. We watch the news, we're pretty clued up in terms of what's going on. But the current crime rate in South Africa plays an important role, a crucial role, in police officers' exposure to stressful and traumatic events. The police officers are on the front line when, as you know, they are here to serve and protect when dealing with these type of crimes, and it's their job. But the number of reported crimes in South Africa in the 2018 to 2019 period, 3,799,498, with the Western Cape alone contributing to 789,540 cases of reported crime. So when we look at this at first glance, we think to ourselves, maybe it's not a lot of crime. We thought it might be more. But the important thing to point out here is these are cases of reported crime only. So the actual crime or the actual figures or numbers is up to our imagination. In a more recent study, Cape Town was regarded as being the most violent city in South Africa and ranked 8th most violent in the world, with 3,065 recorded murders among a population of 4.5 million in a recent ranking. So the frequency and the intensity of this exposure, if not treated for police officers, could lead to them experiencing comorbid disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder, amongst other types of experiences. So research has presented itself and told us that there are various effects to stress within a law enforcement environment. It gives rise to physical and psychological effects. So these effects are substance abuse, absenteeism, resignation with immediate effect, early retirement, post-traumatic stress disorder, as touched on a little bit, and the extreme, even suicide. So this leads to an increased need for trauma intervention strategies to be offered in the South African Police Service and to allow police officers to be assisted, especially those who are exposed to trauma on duty. So there is an Employee Health and Wellness Department, or EHW for short, which stands as the EAP within the SAPS, and they provide identification and resolution of problems, which are not limited to a variety of things: alcohol abuse, drug abuse, stress, or even legal or personal issues that the officer needs assistance with. But it's important for these police officers to be supported with intervention strategies, and also the organization to make an effort. It has to be an organizational effort that needs to be created. So these EHW professionals consist of various role players. They are your psychologists, your counselors, your chaplains, your social workers, right? So we look at the crime rate and we look at the officer's assistance, the amount of crime compared to the police officers that's on the ground level. And we need to ask the question, is it working? Is the trauma interventions and the EHW programs, are they working? So although trauma intervention programs are established within the SAPS, this study then shows that there is a difference in perception about the effectiveness and the service offering. And that's what we're going to speak about in this presentation. So the research purpose. To date, there have been limited studies on the perceptions of the intervention strategies implemented to relieve work-related stress, especially or in the context of the SAPS. And no studies, to the knowledge of the researcher, have made any recommendations toward various intervention strategies to be established within the SAPS. Interestingly here, the 2012 to 2013 SAPS annual report was the last to contain a review of stress-related problems and psychological disorders, until recently the 2018 to 2019 report. So this is a 7-year gap of wellness statistics. So we need to ask the question of, what happened in those 7 years? We know that South Africa has one of the most violent cities in the world now. Our murder rate per population is quite high. But the absence of these statistics, in the opinion of the researcher, was to eliminate stats on suicide and create a negative perception or put SAPS in a negative light. So this then shows that there is a problem, the amount of crime to the need for trauma intervention, and also the effects of the amount of crime on the SAPS. So the purpose of the study, the overall purpose, was to investigate the differences in perception towards stress and trauma intervention strategies in the SAPS. And this is between the employee health and wellness staff, as well as active police officers. And then also to determine the intervention strategies that are offered to police officers to manage work-related stress and trauma, to determine the police officers and EHW staff's perception of intervention strategies, and then to determine possible intervention strategies to address work-related stress and trauma. And then the researcher then attempted to answer the following research questions. What intervention strategies are offered to police officers to manage work-related stress and trauma? What are police officers and the employee health and wellness staff's perception of these intervention strategies? And what intervention strategies should be established to address work-related stress and trauma? Okay, moving on to the research design. So the researcher embarked on qualitative research. So a qualitative research design was used, but more specifically a comparative design. And this is allowing the researcher to draw comparisons between two groups. So the qualitative research approach is exploratory in nature. So it allows the researcher to identify meanings related to the phenomena and the underlying qualities of subjective experiences. So through this comparative design, the researcher hopes that the study will add value to the body of knowledge, as the differences and similarities in perception of the two key primary role players within the trauma debriefing process in the SAPS are then explored. So here the interest of the researcher was to tap into police officers and the wellness staff's subjective interpretations. And then the aim was to explain the differences and similarities to create a deeper understanding of the social reality within the police. So therefore, the qualitative approach was highlights itself here, because the qualitative research then views social reality through its interpretation by individuals. So this was the approach that the researcher then embarked on. So moving on to the population and sample. So for this particular study, the population is made up of two subgroups of the SAPS. So the first subgroup contains the staff members of the EHW department, which was 50 staff members at the time. And these staff members had experience in dealing with police officers' stress and trauma-related incidents, and also constant engagement with the members of the SAPS. And the second subgroup consisted of visible police officers from different ranks in the Western Cape who had some sort of experience of incident, a stress-related incident, trauma while on the job. And then in total, there's 15 participants were selected from the population. 8 staff members of the active police visible group, and then 7 of the EHW group was then selected. And this was then done after a pilot test was conducted with 2 police officers using the semi-structured interview guide. So the pilot study was important because the researcher really wanted to pre-test the methodology surrounding the questions, to validate the interview guide's methodology. And this was done on 2 SAPS officials within the same unit of analysis. So the observations here was that they used highly emotive responses to the questions. The finding was that they understood the questions, but they gave the researcher lots of examples on trauma, and they were highly emotive in the response. And this is really what the researcher wanted. And the conclusion was that the interview guide then had to remain the same, and no edits then had to be made to the interview guide. The non-probability sampling with convenience sampling was the method of sampling used. The researcher relied on section commanders for psychological service to identify EHW professionals in order to conduct the research on, and also various station commanders for the 3 stations to assist in identifying participants. And then the 15 police officials were then identified to serve as the unit of analysis for the study, and they share the similar characteristics within their subgroup and are representative of the population. So the researcher followed an internal process. So we had to get lots of approvals within the SAPS. We had to get approval by the head of psychological services. And then in order to get permission to get into the offices of the EHW department, and then also the various police stations. How we collected the data, the instrument was in-depth interviews as a method of data collection for the study. So it gave the researcher flexibility to ask questions, to gain information, to probe, and also allow the participant then to clarify a point that they wanted to make, or if they wanted to explain more with regards to the particular question that was asked. And it was a semi-structured interview with the 15 participants, and it was an open-ended conversation manner in which the interviews were then conducted. So the researcher had to be face-to-face, so this was pre-COVID. The researcher and the participants sat down face-to-face, information was discussed, and then it was also recorded and then transcribed verbatim. Okay, more on the data collection and analysis. So the qualitative thematic technique was the appropriate data analysis technique for this particular research study. The researcher tried to examine the meaning, the patterns, and the themes that as it presents itself. The researcher looked for the characteristics, focused on underlying themes. The data was analyzed by reading through transcripts and then compacted into meaningful units. Units were then grouped together, and meaning was associated by naming the data, and then the coding of the data allowed for saturation of the data collected as well as for interpretation. Okay, moving on to the research findings. So common themes and sub-themes then emerged after the data analysis. And it is as follows. The themes are trauma, response to trauma, coping, and trauma intervention. The sub-themes out of trauma are organizational stresses, gruesome scenes, first-hand experiences, Sub-themes from response to trauma are physical responses, psychological responses, emotional responses. Sub-themes from coping are the avoidance behavioral coping, avoidance cognitive coping, and approach behavioral coping. Sub-themes from trauma intervention is awareness, organizational offering, participation, experiences, and recommendations. So, trauma. The results of the study showed that both the EHW group as well as the police officer group perceive the working environment to be abnormal and dangerous. So what they mean by that is that police officers are often exposed to traumatic incidents and dangerous events while on duty. So it's your dangerous situations that they are put in, such as shootings, high speed pursuits on the highways, car accidents, and those type of things, dangerous environments that they are put in, dangerous events that they are put in, and just an overall dangerous environment. So interestingly, although both groups have a similar perception of the environment, the EHW group then placed emphasis on the ambivalence and hostility of this environment as a major contributor to trauma. But by contrast, the police officer group placed greater emphasis on the large workload and the pressure that they are under in conjunction to these gruesome scenes as major causes of trauma. So it's interesting because the abnormal environment is accepted as a normality for the police officers. And police officers are more concerned with the administrative requirements. So this just shows that, you know, every day when they go into the job, just these things that they see just becomes normal to them. It's a norm. So what they're really concerned about at the end of the day is doing the admin, you know, writing your cases, your reports, doing your stats, and those type of things. So that was an interesting finding in terms of why they perceive trauma. A difference in perception also presented itself of the first-hand experiences between EHW police officers, so first-hand experiences to trauma. So near-death experiences and witnessing others getting shot or almost dying is noted by police officers to be a major cause of trauma. But EHW then suggests that it's an array of things. It's not just near-death experiences. You know, it's an array of life-threatening and dangerous events contribute to the experience of trauma. So this is maybe the EHW staff giving their professional opinion on things, you know. The understanding is that, you know, it's not just one thing, but it's many things that contribute to an overall experience. It could be something small, as witnessing someone else get into an accident. Instead, I say small in the sense that the person's not dying, but witnessing someone else get into an accident rather than getting shot. Someone bumping into a pole, you know, it's other things rather than just others getting shot or near-death experiences, in a sense where police officers are put in an environment where shots are fired between them and a gang or something like that. So this then leads to, it might be attributed to a lack of understanding from EHW toward what the police officer views as the most distressing events in terms of when counseling actually takes place. So the researcher interprets it in a way that EHW gives their professional opinion. However, the important thing to take away here is that a police officer views the near-death experience and getting shot as the major cause of trauma, and that then needs to be taken into account when doing counseling, because that's their perception on things. And then the findings on the response to trauma. Sub-themes, as I pointed out earlier: physical response, psychological response, and emotional response. So the aggressive behavior, which is often physical in nature, is found to be a common traumatic response by both the EHW and police officers. So this aggressive behavior could be directed at colleagues or at a significant other at home. You know, this is them, the officers relieving built up anger as a cause of what they experience on the job. A difference in perception towards suicide ideation is presented in the study, which is quite an interesting finding. EHW doesn't perceive this to be a common response, whereby the police officers perceive suicide within the SAPS to be a big concern. So they say this in a sense where being exposed to multiple traumatic incidents could lead to re-traumatization, and ultimately the police officer taking their own life. And also, they are the ones that are seeing their colleagues and their friends taking their own life. So in this sense, the researcher felt that EHW did not want to explore the theme in depth to an external person. And this also then comes back to my previous point about the annual report. The topic of the extreme of suicide is kind of dodged in terms of providing statistics or providing information on. The results then further highlighted post-traumatic stress disorder and depression to be the consequences of re-traumatization, which results in police officers then reliving the traumatic incident and also enhancing the emotional instability. Okay, moving on to coping. Sub-themes identified here: avoidance behavioral coping, avoidance cognitive coping, and approach behavioral coping. So the EHW and the police officer participant groups, they share similar perception toward the avoidance behavioral and also the cognitive coping strategies used by police officers. So that's interesting. And these type of coping mechanisms includes the abuse of alcohol, over-the-counter illegal substances, absenteeism, staying away using their sick leave, but also making use of their annual leave. Humor, and this is making jokes amongst each other after being exposed to a traumatic event or traumatic incident. They'll make jokes with each other in order to liven things up or to make it seem like it wasn't such a big thing that they've been exposed to. And also denial toward the significance of traumatic events. And this denial then comes in the fact that we will explain, I'll get to later, is that maybe they feel the need that they do not need to attend trauma debriefing or counseling or a trauma intervention offered by EHW. So similar perceptions toward approach behavioral coping strategies are present for the most part. And this includes the usage of a buddy system and also in confiding in immediate family. So the buddy system is an informal debriefing approach offered by SAPS, whereby someone within the unit or someone at the station or maybe a supervisor maybe get some sort of training, and they will be the buddy, or for a newer employee within the unit, they will then lean towards this person, just to have some sort of informal debriefing, someone to speak to after they've experienced a traumatic incident, rather than going to EHW or to someone higher up the ranks. So the use of EHW interventions as an approach behavioral coping mechanism is highlighted as a vast difference in perception. So this is the crux of the matter here in terms of the interventions and the findings of the research, because there's a big difference in perception. So what the results indicate here is that all EHW participants reported on police officers making use of these interventions when exposed to traumatic incidents. But in contrast, only 2 police officer participants reported on their willingness to make use of EHW interventions. So this then means the majority of police officer participants reported on their preference to not use the in-house services, but to make use of external professional services when exposed to trauma. So the use of private interventions is preferred, as we can see. Police officers are of the opinion that EHW interventions lack confidentiality. And also, in this instance, if confidentiality is an issue, it also makes the trauma experience worse. What they say is that if something is discussed today, the whole office knows about it tomorrow, and this then presents a problem in the EHW department. So moving on to trauma intervention as part of the research findings, and this is awareness, organizational offering, participation, experiences, and also recommendations. So the researcher found that there's a poor marketing strategy toward EHW service offerings that's presented in the study. Police officer participants speak about minimal awareness of certain trauma interventions that they can be made use of. But in comparison here, the EHW participants perceive that the department's intervention offerings to be marketed very well. And EHW, within the data collection process, they draw on their stats of the events that they roll out during the year annually to market their service offerings. And interestingly, police officers who have attended draw to less significant issues being discussed. So things such as maybe financial advice, or how to things such as diseases, but not elements relating to counseling or any of the other trauma intervention things that EHW offers. So the difference in perception here is that the availability of trauma intervention services is present. So the EHW participants report on it being always offered, where police officer participants acknowledge its presence but report on it not being offered. What EHW did mention is that they have a staff shortage, and this was reported by some of the participants, in contrast to a large staff complement within the police. So what they're saying here basically is that if officers are saying that they aren't made aware of the service offering, or the service offering is not presented to them, is that because of their staff shortage. They can't then accommodate all of the police officers indeed, which is quite interesting, and also a little bit, it's alarming in the sense that not every police officer can be afforded the opportunity to receive counseling when they need counseling. So if you look at the numbers, 50 EHW staff members compared to an unidentified figure, or a number that's not available for the number of police officers within the Western Cape. Police officers then also report on stigma attached with attending trauma programs, right? Such as the macho image embedded in police culture, the fear of one's chances being promoted, and also the lack of confidentiality in counseling sessions. So, so the stigma here is that it's a men don't cry approach, toughness. They have to show that nothing affects them. Don't show emotion. At the end of the day, addressed in the interview is that some EHW professionals did mention police officers might not want to attend because of the fear of not being promoted as well. So the study showed that there are significant differences in perception toward the effectiveness of trauma intervention strategies that are presented. So majority of EHW participants reported trauma intervention strategies to be reasonably effective and having a positive impact. Whereby, interestingly, some of the EHW participants believe that the current programs that are offered are not as effective as it should be. So this is then in alignment with majority of the police officers who perceive trauma interventions within the SAPS as not being particularly effective. Police officers reported on not knowing how to contact the right people for assistance, and the belief that EHW staff members also don't know how to do their job properly. Police officers also, in the trauma intervention research findings, showed that, or reported that, it's being very impersonal, with no follow-ups being made, And EHW presented recommendations of enhancing the current program. So they here identify that things could be done better, such as having a medical stream, life skills, and compulsory counseling. Police officers, participants provided recommendations that focus on immediate aid of traumatized officers. So this things such as erection of SAPS, private healthcare facility, for example. But both groups, interestingly here, spoke about the ranks within EHW, and the removal of ranks could be something could be beneficial, because this ranks disconnect the two functions, right, and provide the defining roles between the two groups. And it's also something which I'm going to touch on a bit later. So the findings then bring out recommendations for the SAPS. So the researcher provides various points in terms of various recommendations that could be implemented within the SAPS environment. The first one is that it's necessary for policymakers and the executive authority within the SAPS to fully align with the DPSA national instruction. So the national instruction indicates that it's compulsory that every police officer who is exposed to a traumatic incident while on duty should receive debriefing. And this alignment should include a medical team of doctors and specialists on request for employees to support EHW. So this shows that SAPS is not being fully compliant and also lacking a medical team of specialists and doctors. The second one is the development of psychosocial therapeutic programs within the SAPS, which could align to a medical team consisting of various specialists and overseen by EHW. So this recommendation can be taken further to the development of psychosocial therapeutic programs within the SAPS, in addition to the structured counseling. They could offer things such as motivational enhancement, case management, care coordination, psychotherapy, and relapse prevention. The other recommendation is the development of a structured compulsory trauma intervention program. Right. So what we found within the research is that not all SAPS officials, once exposed to trauma, receive the necessary help and assistance. Right. And it's sometimes it's not because it's not offered, but sometimes it's that they don't want to go. So the development of a compulsory trauma intervention program would then allow all SAPS officers who are exposed to a traumatic incident to get help where needed, and not for the trauma to sit with them and for them to go back out into the field and on the job without getting any debriefing or any assistance. And then, as spoke about earlier, the existence of ranks assigned to EHW personnel to be removed. So EHW staff members are assigned ranks as per the patrolling officers. And most EHW staff have higher ranks than the officer that they see and that they help and that they interview. So this is a power dynamic really that needs to be broken. And the reason being is that officers may feel uncomfortable to attend, knowing that they are speaking to a superior. Another point is that life skills programs and lessons should be brought back into police colleges as part of the curriculum. So this was once part of the curriculum, but it's no longer part of the curriculum. And the reason for this is that officers are still engaged and they're eager to learn once they are in the colleges. So the implementation of this program could ensure police officers become comfortable with speaking to others and equip the member to handle the responsibilities that comes with being a police officer. The last recommendation is that the deployment of an EHW member at each station. So this is noted in terms of SAPS policy that this should be the case. But as we've discussed previously, that the EHW themselves are short of staff, so this isn't be possible. But however, to align to SAPS policy, this should be the case, and internal measures should be put into place in order to get the right amount of numbers. So each police station should have an EHW member present to be situated in trauma rooms. So in this instance, police officers' problems can be identified immediately, and assistance can be offered immediately if an EHW member is on site. The conclusion. So the recurring themes that present itself, as we discuss, give rise to similarities on the perception of trauma, the different responses to trauma, and the coping mechanisms. However, as noted, the awareness of interventions and the organizational offerings presented a negative perception toward participating in trauma intervention strategies in the SAPS. So the majority of police officers do not make use of trauma intervention programs offered in the SAPS, even though they are aware that it's needed. And some participants within EHW agree that the interventions that are offered is not enough, but they were also cautious to report on it not being effective. The findings then confirm there's a clear difference in perception between EHW and police on stress and trauma intervention strategies offered in the SAPS. So the impact of this disparity could negatively affect the trauma recovery of the police officers. So this study raised an issue of stress and trauma within the context of the SAPS. However, it's something that all EAPs can consider. Now, I'm working within a safety environment which consists of law enforcement officers, metro police, traffic, fire and rescue. And I just smile whenever I hear them bring up something that that I've researched and something that's one of my themes, because I can see the similarities and I can see the linkage. However, further research is recommended for other industries. And reason why I say that is that there could be a disjunction between, as we've seen, what the EAP thinks that they are offering and how police officers or participants in other industries perceive these interventions. So it's important for professionals to provide interventions and to analyze if it's really working, what could be improved, how the participant perceives it to be. Because at the end of the day, it shouldn't be seen as a formality to run these processes, but we need to offer assistance to those that need it and are exposed to stress and trauma. Because here we are really playing with lives and individuals' mental well-being at the end of the day. So I'm not going to show a motivational quote. I'm rather going to leave you with a quote from one of the participants in the study. And it goes like this: "The work that we do falls out of the normal experience. It's not like you get to go to the office and sit behind your computer. That doesn't apply to police officers on ground level." And I just thought about this for a second, and I thought to myself, we really need to appreciate the positions that we are in. Most of us, I know some of us are on site and on field, but most of us, we rely on our computer and to get our work done and do our work. And we should really not take the simple things for granted. Although these officers chose their career, each day they put themselves at risk when they go out onto the streets and they are exposed to traumatic incidents that could have an impact on themselves and those around them. And they do all of this to protect us, the members of the public. I want to thank you for listening and viewing my presentation. I hope that it has been interesting to some. I know it has been a privilege for me to present my research at the annual SIOPSA conference, my first time presenting here. Any questions to the study can be directed to mine or Fatima's email addresses, and I've listed it at the bottom of the screen over there. We are based at the University of the Western Cape and the Department of Industrial Psychology. I thank you once again, and I hope that you all stay safe during these trying times. Thank you very much.